So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Mashiyach the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiyach laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Mashiyach, it is always important having this particular prophet in our minds, because reading from Mashiyach gives us then, ever since the Torah became then the very core of lives of those who are searching then for answers from the Mashiyach, we read Mashiyach then, it serves many purposes. Some of them regarded with Mashiyach himself, the second regarding with the time where then Mashiyach was at, and also many prophecies of the future. Reading then from Mashiyach, the 61st chapter, what can we understand of then the Mashiyach himself, when he was reading before the people the Megillah of this particular prophet? He was reading then the favorable ear of his father, and then because of this he then did not read the autumn feast. So then, the division that comes from the Mashiyach not reading the rest of it, it's because he was then in the midst of the objective of completing then the spring feast. Reading then from Mashiyach, the 61st chapter, we have an idea then what the Mashiyach was then doing. Let's then understand what he was involved with. Then he was, the Spirit of Yahweh is upon me. He's speaking of himself. For he has anointed me, the Mashiyach, then to give the great news of those who are then broken, those who were not involved with maintaining the path, and then to proclaim the favorable ear of then the Creator himself. Then he did not read, and the vengeance of our God. He did not read this portion. Why did he not read this portion then? Because the Mashiyach was aware of Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. He was aware of, he was involved himself with the spring feast only. So then, because of these, because of the spring feast, we find then Moadim, or Moad as singular. Why then at this time and place, as far as we can understand it from congregations, why then it's the most important at the moment explaining mostly the spring feast? Was it then the spring feast important? It was. But what's then the objective of the spring feast showing the autumn feast? That's what we should be concerned with. The spring feast was completed because autumn was coming. What was then in the mind of the Mashiyach? What was going on for him to complete the spring feast and teaching the people regarding the autumn? He did not read at the time he was completing the spring feast, but he read it when he spent a year with his people. So then, what went on when the Mashiyach was in the earth? Very important. What he was then involved with, what was he then involved himself with as far as the autumn feast is concerned? Where do we read? The point is, we don't read very often. We read a lot of the autumn feast. We have 4 authors of the spring feast, do we not? We have Mashiyach, you have then Mark, Luke, and you have Yohanan. Mashiyach, Yohanan were from the faith, were from the lineage, whereas Luke and Mark, they were not, they were Gentiles. Yet they give us a very specific ministry teaching of the Mashiyach himself. When he was in the earth, how many days was his ministry? Exactly 490 days. This was the time of ministry of the Mashiyach himself. If you calculate from the original manuscripts, you find it was 490. Thus he completed the spring feast. The autumn feast is the other half of the Torah and the prophets. So what is the period of the autumn feast? 490 days. Why then do we read a lot of the spring feast and not much as the autumn? There is a reason for it. Let's explore then what was the objective of the Mashiyach after he came back from Sheol. What is Sheol? What is infernal? That's where the souls of the unbelievers, they are stored in until the end of this age, isn't it? So then, these people are down in Sheol, their souls are in torment. When the Mashiyach he went there and he spent 72 hours, it was not very fun. But then the Mashiyach came back. And when he did, he maintained what he saw down there in Infernal, in Sheol, for quite some time, only for himself. So then, let's understand these very precisely, because each of these are related with the prophets. And that's why we don't understand the autumn feast. The Mashiyach completed the spring feast in order for them to understand the autumn. But why don't we then talk of the autumn feast? It's very simple. Because we were never taught. They never taught us of the autumn feast. Always the spring. Why these then is taking place so much, the spring feast rather than the autumn feast? Because the land, the Mashiyach, when he spent an entire year with his people, he taught them how to maintain the holy feasts, precisely as Moses wrote. As then the Mashiyach was teaching his people, or reteaching them, because they were centuries, they were not maintaining the feasts as they should have. And because there were then Maasim and Takanot mixed with the holy instructions, the Mashiyach then cleaned the holy instructions, and then he taught them for a year how to maintain the holy feasts. So then, why do we have then in Acts of Ruach HaKodesh 40 days? 40 days, it was not the time the Mashiyach spent with his people. 40 days is related with fasting. Why do we have fasting in the very portions of the first chapter or second chapter of Acts? Because it teaches that we should maintain our flesh under the control of the Spirit, is it not? Then, as we stop at this moment and we understand what the Mashiyach went through, what was then the objective of the Mashiyach is firstly teaching them how to maintain holy cities. The Mashiyach was the living tabernacle. As the tabernacle of the desert was mobile, so the Mashiyach, he went out of Jerusalem and he became mobile. What do we understand of the holy instructions is this: the Son substituted Yahweh. He was the Creator, and Yahweh Yeshua substituted him on a holy seat, did he not? Yes, he did, because he said the whole power was given to him in heaven and earth. Because of these, then he was preparing them for the autumn. While the Mashiyach was then with a span of time of a year, teaching his people, prosperity was on the land. That's what we don't understand. While the Mashiyach was explaining the holy feasts and maintaining the feasts step by step, there was prosperity on the land. While the Mashiyach was teaching them and reteaching them the holy feasts step by step, there was prosperity on the land. While the Mashiyach was explaining the holy feasts and reteaching the people, there was prosperity on the land. What does it take place when there is prosperity on the land? People, they tend to forget God. What went on when the Mashiyach was then finishing his 12 months with the people, and the people then became aware of the holy feasts as per the holy instructions of Moses? What did he do? He began to explain the autumn feast. Then he began to explain the vengeance. He began to explain what those people, if they love this world more than the Torah, if they want prosperity more than the Torah, if they want to become more prominent in this world, even if the person then wins the world and its riches, then a person is lost. The Mashiyach taught, and he was very hard. And the people did not like him. The Mashiyach was unlikable, because he began to lay it down the way it was. Prosperity was the byproduct of his work. But then people wanted prosperity more than the Mashiyach, because they thought they were during the time of the 1,000 years of his rulership, where the time he was then restoring Israel the way it was during the time of Shilimon. And it was not so. They should be concerned with learning the holy feasts and forming holy cities. The Megillah of Yehuda explains the people on their way in order to form a holy city. Read it. You understand the people on their way. Now, when the Mashiyach was explaining and lay it down real hard, what was going to take place then with autumn feast, people then, they did not like it. They began to hate him, because they loved this age more than the age to come. So then, when he ascended, he left then those 12 guys, and they were then in charge. The problem is, there was a huge persecution on the land. Those authorities that then enjoyed teachings of the Mashiyach and prosperity, they began to become afraid because of the judgment coming. Then they began to persecute those who were teaching on behalf of the Mashiyach. Those testifiers on behalf of the Mashiyach, they were being persecuted. And the persecution was so hard that Yohanan ended up in northern Africa. That's where then he formed the first holy city of the time of the 1,000 years of the Mashiyach. From there, his team put together documents. They gathered the documents of the dispensation period, and then he was able to straighten out the 7 cities of Asia Minor, Philadelphia and the other cities, Smyrna. They were able to straighten them out, and those cities then became secluded as they should be, and other cities then came afterwards. And it was so for 1,000 years. In 1009, then the Muslims destroy Jerusalem and the tomb from where the Mashiyach came from, for the first time ever. Then the world made a declaration, They had no more holy cities, and they did not want any more holy cities. Thus, then the cities were laid waste. Prophet Mashiyach then explains that this period of time would be 1,000 years, where the people of God would be mixed with the world for a time. They are going to be roaming the earth for a specific time. Then the other 1,000 years of Nahashatan, where we then understand as the New World Order, has ended. And we are during the time of the restoration period. Thus, the first holy city of this restoration of the holy cities is precisely where Yohanan started with, Northern Africa, the land of Cush. As it was during the time of Yohanan, the first holy city, so then the first holy city of this period is in the same place where Yohanan started at. Isn't that amazing the way it works? So we have similar situations in both occasions with the same plan. Because of these, what do we understand of the autumn? Speaks of judgment, speaking of those who love this world more than the Torah. They are going to die, they are going to perish, they are going to be in torment. And those people in prosperity, they did not like to hear it. Thus then persecution. This time then, not only this, but the 7 cities of Asia Minor must return. And the first holy city on the land of Cush is the very place where then people are going to be going from this city up north into Jerusalem and then doing the pruning. It is an amazing time because Zechariah, the 8th chapter, explains that 10 Gentiles are going to get a hold of the garment of the Jew and asking for teaching. It's because they are en route from the holy city on the land of Cush up to Jerusalem to do pruning. And then Gentiles along the way, they are going to get a hold of them, but then the Jew is not going to show them. They are not going to be teaching Gentiles. The teaching of Gentiles are done by those who are Gentiles saved in the Mashiyach and testifying on his behalf, while those who are then from the lineage are going to be functioning with the 7 spirits of Elohim. Isn't it amazing the way the situation works? You have situations from distinct times working precisely with the same plan. So then, autumn feast. It is from Leviticus the 23rd chapter, from the 23rd verse through the 44th. This particular time explains in Galah or Revelation. When you say if a person is saved, what most people do, are you saved? Oh yes, do you understand Revelation? No, how can you be saved? A saved person is a revealed person. Thus we must understand vengeance or revelation. That's why when the Mashiyach completed the spring feast, he was already working this entire year, preparing them for the autumn. But then when he left, people changed from expecting judgment into their own prosperity period. That's when they lost track. That's why then later when they began to work and place these documents together, they couldn't mention that the Mashiyach spent this time with them in order to teach them the autumn. They had taken away the autumn feast from the entire understanding. But the autumn feast is there, very precisely as it was during the time when Moses wrote it. And we must learn it because the spring feast is completed Now comes the autumn feast. And we are during a time period in our lives where we're going to become extremely prosperous. This new system of China is going to bring prosperity to thousands. We are on the verge of understanding a new computerized systems then being implemented in each computer, and people will prosper. Now, the same teachings of the Mashiyach when he laid down real hard prior of his ascension, it is then during this time of the restoration period that people are going to lay it down real hard. There is a similitude from then and our future. Next time I'm going to evaluate even further this spring feast and autumn, mostly the autumn feast in Revelation or Galah, and explain then what then the war is going to be at the very end. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.